Hello and welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. I am joined here with Ethan, aka Film Junkie. Ethan is a he has a page on YouTube which you can find in the pinned comment down below. Ethan, it has been a long time since I've gotten to talk to you and since the fans here have gotten to hear your voice. Thank you for joining us. I very much appreciate it.
Of course, happy to. It's been a long time. It's definitely been a long time.
And I'm really glad to get to talk to you about these movies because every time we talk about these directors, these specific movies, I feel like another piece of the puzzle is kind of unlocked or illuminated.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, it's glad to. It's glad. I'm glad to be here. I should say.
And the subject of the evening is, of course, Dario Argento. And we were speaking a little bit about this before, but we discussed the movie Suspiria in one of our very first episodes, episode 2. And that was a double feature of Suspiria and a Chinese ghost story. And I think Suspiria was the highlight of those two. No shade to Chinese ghost story. But that is such a unique movie, and when you dive deep into Argento's filmography, you very quickly begin to realize that all of his filmography is very, very unique.
Absolutely. But I'd argue that Suspiria is unique even within his filmography. I definitely think it's his most polished and it's his most grandeur, his biggest. It seems like you could tell he wanted to tell this story in the grandest way he's ever told a story at that point.
I would have to agree with you on that. The story felt like it came together in such a perfect way. Um, and some of his stories are maybe edgier. Some of his stories might have like a supernatural nature as well. But that movie distinctly pushed just the right buttons at just the right time, and it felt like a perfect storm. Quite honestly.
Absolutely. We did also discuss the 2018 Suspiria as well.
And I'm very glad you brought that up. And I fell into Dario Argento like very backwards because that movie actually was like the door that opened up for me to discover Argento, I guess. Um,
Hmm.
because I watched that movie. I think it was Ralph the Movie Maker, with whom I believe you are somewhat familiar with because of Sardonicast. Um,
Yeah,
he said
big fan of them.
exactly. He said it was a good movie, so I checked it out and then uh, heard kind of the internal debate amongst film fans as to which one was better. And I was like, oh crap! Like I didn't even know that the 2018 Suspiria was a remake, and then on top of that, it was definitely like a very different movie. And for people to say, well, the original is arguably better, made me want to check it out, and then slowly learned more and more about Argento because of my interest in Giallo. And now, I've seen a little over a handful of his films, and he's definitely one of the names, if you're a horror fan, that should be high on your priority list.
Absolutely. He's so influential when it comes to building suspense and when it comes to not less of fantastical or fictional horror. Well, I mean, it is fictional, but it's more of a humanistic sort of horror rather than something like a monster or like a magical being or something. It's a human being that's going around killing people, and he's just so good at creating suspense. I'd argue he's one of the best since Hitchcock to create suspense. Him and John Carpenter with films like Halloween and The Thing.
I agree. And that time period was so rife because of these two, Argento and Carpenter, and very unique. Carpenter was definitely a visionary, but Argento, if there's a word kind of beyond that, because the way he infuses color in his movie is ultra distinctive. Um, I would argue, you're watching an Argento movie very quickly, and the story he's not afraid to kind of tell a story that's completely out of left field. He
Mhm.
has a very distinct creative voice when it comes to writing as well.
Definitely. Um, very definitely a very Italian director. He definitely has a lot of dubbing in his movies.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the stories that he creates are really complement his filmmaking really well.
And you bring up a very good point. Obviously, with the dubbing, that's a huge thing, especially with spaghetti westerns, that you find a lot. That the dubbing is evident. And I read a review somewhere about one of Argento's movies. It could have very well been Suspiria, but it might have been another one, where they say that it's almost as though the dubbing works to Argento's advantage because a lot of his movies create this nearly dreamlike feeling, and the dubbing almost works in a way to where it like massages your brain to where it piques that part of your mind that something isn't right, and that works
Mhm.
very well for when you're presenting something in like a dreamlike state, which he does, you know, from time to time in his movies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's most prominent with, in my opinion, his best film and his actual magnum opus, which is Deep Red. Just bringing his surrealism and brilliant suspense together with this like nearly perfectly crafted mystery just makes for a truly unique, one of a kind horror experience that you can't really get with any other director.
Yeah, and in that movie distinctly, his filmography, I should say, but that movie distinctly as well, because that is my favorite Argento movie. Um, he is near the top of the list for both horror and giallo, so he's a very neat director to investigate if you are diving deeper into film. Uh, that's what's made him high at the top of my list time and time again, trying to gain exposure to different genres and subgenres and watch more horror movies and discover this new subgenre, which is Giallo. Uh, it makes Argento, the perfect foil to kind of fulfill both of those roles, which is, very unique. Obviously, you only really get that from the Italian directors, but the Italian horror, how it's done, is so unique, and in large part that is due to Argento's fingerprint on the Italian style within horror.
Absolutely. Takes a lot from filmmakers like Mario Bava
Mm-hmm.
or who else? I really can't think of anybody else, to be honest. I can only think of Mario Bava for some reason, but Dario Argento is probably the greatest Giallo director of all time, easily,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the best directors in horror history.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. His great movies really stand apart, and his style is super distinctive. The when you look at his movies too, you know, you have Deep Red, Suspiria, Inferno, Tenebrae, Phenomena, Opera, Stellendal, Syndrome, Mother of Tears, Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Four Flies. Um, he is definitely very widely known, and I think in large part, I think Suspiria arguably put him on the map. But
Hmm.
like you said, Ethan, I think Deep Red is like the deep cut favorite amongst people who saw Suspiria, liked it, and then dove deeper into his filmography.
Absolutely. It is interesting that it is a good thing that you listed off his filmography because like he's not like John Carpenter where Rather Media mentioned this, but he he's not like John Carpenter where John Carpenter had this really great run from Halloween all the way to They Live,
Mm-hmm.
and then just kind of slowly went down. Um, but Dario Argento went from Bird with a Crystal Plumage in 1970 all the way up to making one solid movie after the other. He was a very consistently good director up until the mid 90s, where he pretty much, I think most people will argue that he pretty much crashed and burned from there and made like really terrible movies throughout the 2000s and
Yeah,
onward.
and you know there's always a discussion. You know, directors isn't it differs, right? It's not like acting. It's not like a whole lot of other things that are involved within film, but you can make that argument that it is hard to be relevant and creative, you know, 30 years after you jumped onto the scene. Um,
Yeah.
and, you know, after Stallendal Syndrome, his next movie was 2007. And I grabbed a screenshot of his movies off of They Shoot Pictures, Don't They? And I thought I double checked this on Letterbox. I could very well be wrong, but I think they don't include his 2022 Dark Glasses movie. I don't know whether that's because, you know, maybe he was only an additional director or whatnot, but very valid point. But you're absolutely right, Ethan, in that that's a very solid run. I've seen the bulk of those movies, you know, starting with The
Mhm.
Bird with the Crystal Plumage all the way to Opera, and just all very distinctive, but all very quality movies for sure.
Absolutely. Bird with the Crystal Plumage was his very first movie.
And I think it was a very solid debut and a very polished debut as well.
Mhm.
Were you surprised? Like going in first off, did you know it was his debut? And then second off, were you surprised when you finished that it was his debut?
I didn't realize that it was his debut until I rewatched it for this. But I was actually pretty impressed with how how visual, how much Dario Argento paid attention to visuals and specifically like set pieces. The way he would use his set pieces are really just very interesting. Like the opening scene where you have this giant window and you get this wide shot of this man just running in this room with two glass walls and trying to help out this woman, and he's like helpless.
Yeah, I was looking at it now because I, quite honestly, I didn't put it together until like just now that this was his debut film, and I have to say his cinematography from debut was spot on, and
Yeah,
I think if you're seeing that as a producer, you have to realize this is a very talented director that is at work in this movie, without doubt.
absolutely. Um, shall I discuss the plot of Bird with Crystal Plumage?
Absolutely.
So it is about a man who witnesses the attempted homicide of a woman who runs this art gallery. And this man, along with his girlfriend, attempt to investigate and find out the identity of the killer, which is basically uh, very similar to a vast majority of his movies.
Yeah, it's the setting. There's little wrinkles in every movie that differentiate them from each other, but yeah, I mean, it's all of his Giallo movies are very much like that, and even the ones that are supernatural in nature, like Suspiria or Phenomena, are quite similar as well. Um,
Mhm.
One thing I want to highlight here is for his debut. This had a budget of $500,000 and had a gross revenue of um, one. This is in Libra. 1,650 Libra, which calculates into $921,513.40. So generally, the budget is like around doubled, a little over doubled when you put in the marketing expenses. It could have been different in the 70s, but this film very close to breaking even. But despite this maybe not having financial success, and that's maybe because, like I said, marketing budget could have been different, the film definitely speaks volumes as to what he could do as a story to kind of keep the suspense going, to keep audiences intrigued, and then tell a
Mhm.
story visually in a way that not a lot of other directors are able to do.
Yeah, 500,000 is pretty impressive for the set pieces that this movie uses specifically. That is an impressively low budget for what he managed to accomplish.
Yeah, it does not feel distinctly low budget. Just to kind of compound what you're saying, but um, the art exhibit and all the settings, um, he would have had to be one crafty director to be able to include everything he did and not have to pay a premium for it. I will
Yeah.
say this movie. We were speaking about this previously. I think it definitely probably inspired a lot of different movies to come. And one of the specific ones that I was talking about earlier, I thought was Halloween. Did you see that as well, Ethan?
Yeah, definitely in terms of its simplicity. Uh, it is a very simple movie, which is a little bit to the film's detriment because it's at the end of the day kind of forgettable in in ways, even though Halloween's iconic
Mm.
and it's simple. Um, Bird with the Crystal Plumage is simple in kind of a forgettable way, but it's also simple in a good way. It's also just like back to basics, um, really well done Giallo suspense thriller horror stuff.
Yeah. Um, and I felt really bad rating this what I did because this is another fan favorite. A lot of people who like Giallo fans, especially, I think this is like a cult favorite amongst those fans.
Mhm.
And there was like a little
It's
bit
one
of.
of the.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Where I was gonna say, they greatly enjoy this and rate it generally higher than I rated it.
It's it's definitely one of his highest rated on Letterboxd, and it's probably one of his most highly critically rated films.
What was your kind of feelings after you finished this movie?
Um, I really liked it. I enjoyed it quite a bit, but I originally gave this when I first watched it because this is a rewatch for me. I gave it a 4 star, and then I forgot about it. I forgot what happens. When you told me we should do Bird with the Crystal Plumage for this, um, I realized I had completely forgotten about it, and so I decided to rewatch it, and we're talking about it now, and I can't remember it again.
the the one thing that I did remember, and this has it's a similar element to something that is pulled off in Deep Red, but it's not the singular element that made Deep Red well, is that there is a detail shown visually to you early on that if you then pick up on it, it will help kind of unlock the whole mystery of the movie.
Yeah.
And
I think the twist is very memorable. The opening is very memorable, and there's one scene where the main character is being chased by this guy in a yellow jacket that I think is very memorable. Was it yellow or was it blue? It was blue and yellow, whatever it was.
yeah, it was, yellow primary, and then I forget what was on the back. It was like E2 or something in blue.
Yeah,
And that was a pretty cool scene. Um, yeah, and quite honestly, as this is gonna sound bad, but I forget the killer's like primary kind of drive, I guess. Like
motivation.
yeah, exactly. Um, which is not ever something you want to say about a giallo or a horror slash, like, I guess if you want to call it an early slasher. That's never
Yeah,
good.
yeah, no. Um, but I mentioned this on my letterbox review, but visually, and I also mentioned this earlier, but visually, it's one of his most impressive in terms of capturing the set pieces with the camera in very interesting ways.
I completely agree. And that is the craziness about this movie as a whole, is what it's able to do for a debut. I know I keep pounding that into the sand, but I just watched one of Kubrick's his first feature length film. He did a lot of stuff really really well for it, but the movie is clunky in a number of reasons, and a lot of them don't really fall into this being Kubrick's fault. But this movie feels polished enough to where it literally, without lying, I mean, it did not strike me as like, oh, this is like someone still learning their craft. It felt like
Yeah.
someone who knew what they wanted to do and were able to execute it.
It's crazy that Kubrick's first movie was that. It's gonna come off harsh, but it's crazy to me that Kubrick's debut was that much of a dud in comparison to something like Birds of the Crystal Plumage, which is actually pretty solid.
They feel miles apart. They feel very very different. Um, I got to give Argento his due credit on this one, because it feels like someone who had plenty of experience, and also like something that I should have mentioned kind of at the onset of this is Argento is very famous amongst any movie fan for having writing credits on The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, which is,
Really?
yeah, pretty cool. Never would have guessed it, just because his storytelling is so much different than what The Good, the Bad, the Ugly goes for. But he feels like such a creative force that after hearing it, you can almost kind of understand how he would have benefited the writing process for that. Um,
Hmm.
and that takes place here because he's able to keep a story continuously going where there's one new interesting detail that makes you want to find out more, which then brings you to another kind of decision tree where uh, he's very good at keeping his story going.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to ask you any additional things you want to highlight in this film.
Um, I definitely think it's paced pretty well. I think uh it goes along at it never I I'm not sure what else to say, to be completely honest. It's the scene in the middle with the guy in the yellow jacket, I think, is really good. Um, I completely forgot what that has to do with the main story.
I in that his films are very much almost like a fever dream.
Yeah.
It's like all this wild and crazy stuff kind of unravels, and then you finally get to the reveal, and you're like, oh my, like I didn't realize that. Uh,
Yeah.
and the ending was very solidly done. I really liked what was done there in that because it convinced me as a viewer, and whether I felt this way or not, it convinced me of it, that there was something distinctly weird about that first murder scene. And he keeps saying, like, I know something was off, I just have to think about it. And I don't know whether you had this thought go through your mind or not, but I was like, this has to be something that only he's privy to and that us as the viewer maybe hadn't seen. But I'm thinking, and I didn't check this, I just just had the trust that I think we did see it the way that it really happened, in that the actual killer you think is the victim at the onset.
Yeah, similar to Deep Red. I think Deep Red did it a little better and
Mm-hmm.
a little more in a way that kind of shocks you. And did it in a very creepy way as well. Just like put uh it presents you with the scene, um, and then presents you with that exact same scene with a much different context, and it's done perfectly. Um, with Bird of the Crystal Plumage, I think that twist is what made me give it a really high score and really made me enjoy it. But I watch it again, and the more I, well, at least try to think about it, the more um, cold I feel towards it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel slightly stronger backing my rating now too. Just because it has its highlights, but besides that, it's I don't want to say vapid might be too strong a word, but it's the only one that's coming to mind. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but one thing I do want to touch upon, the deep red scene, and spoilers for people who haven't seen it, just because I want to kind of gush about it to you. But the mirror scene from the beginning, it's once it presents it again, it's a unique cinematic experience because it feels like it's pulling a memory from your brain. Like, do you remember this? And the feelings that were evoked as that was going on, because when it did originally happen, it did seem like there was something weird there, but it's so early on and then so much happens after the fact that you completely take it for granted, and then that callback is so brilliantly done. And this is another great example of that, but um, definitely not a bad movie. I just I think there is an argument to be had as to how good this movie is.
Yeah. In
Ethan,
terms of like, yeah.
let me ask you, what did you rate this film?
I originally gave this a 4 out of 5, but I switched it. Who knows? Maybe I'll rewatch it again and I'll enjoy it again. It definitely makes me want to rewatch Deep Red. Just talking about Deep Red. But I still think this movie is pretty good. I give it a 3.5 out of 5.
So I was borderline, sort of similarly to you, just a tier lower, between a 3 and a 3.5, and I liked all of Argento's films more than this one, and they were all like 3.5 generally, like these middle tier movies. So it's very much borderline. An argument could be made on my behalf for a 3.5 or a 3. I stuck with a 3. It feels bad. I do have a ton of like 3-star movies that I liked. Um, this is included in that because it was a fun movie at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I didn't not enjoy this movie. Just trying to look at like how good was it though, and
Hmm.
I was I was just kind of simmering after it, and it didn't strike me quite the way that Deep Red did. That one I thought was absolutely great. Um,
Yeah.
I'm with you. A rewatch this could easily bump up, but um, it's a 3 as it stands now.
Hmm.
The next film we watched is Tenebre. This is a film in which an author comes to Italy, Rome
Yeah.
specifically, is stalked by a serial killer who is harassing him while killing all people associated with his work on his latest book. Um, this had distribution problems, or distribution. No, sorry. This had modest box office success in Italy and Europe, but it did not perform as well as some of Argento's previous films. And the primary reason for that was that this movie had to be released as a video 18 rating, which means only 18 and above could watch this film. Um,
Interesting.
Surprising to you?
Um, it's definitely his most violent film as far as just like the content goes. Um, yeah, I could see that. Like, there's definitely nudity in it, and there's definitely like some pretty good gore in it. But I feel like 18's a little harsh for it.
Yeah, because this is gonna sound like a old man question, um, but for R-rated movies, do you have to show ID that you're 18, or is it 17, or how do R-rated movies work?
So if there's no one, if there's you have a party and everyone has to be 17 or older. If not, then one person has to be or older.
Okay, with a video 18, my only assumption, I don't know this 100%, but I think even if you have like a an older adult, I don't think you're allowed in. Like I think it's literally, you know, gotta have ID of 18 to get in,
Yeah.
and that's gonna be a killer at box office. And I'm sure your very much aware of this, but like film distributors are just only now beginning to touch upon R-rated films after like proven success of like some of those, like specifically Deadpool, showing that it can bring in a lot of money despite that rating.
Yeah,
And one thing that I have to say, like I I appreciate being able to tell a story that's appropriate for multiple ages, but as far as what you're able to do artistically with an R rating, the liberty that that gives you, it's awesome whenever it's able to be done. I don't know.
absolutely.
You feel the okay. I
I
figured you
feel
would feel the same way, especially like you're a fan of Tarantino, and I would feel a lot of his movies would probably fall into that category if I'm correct.
absolutely. Yeah, just the R rating is like the stamp of freedom
Yes,
to me.
and yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I was gonna expand upon that point, but you boiled it down to the most distilled version of it. It's the freedom, and that this is not absolutely a cash grab. This isn't something that's trying to maybe prey on nostalgia. Whatever negative connotation you want to put on a film, when something decides to go R rated, you know that their creative vision is first and foremost, and that they are telling the story that exactly the way they want to tell it for the most part, you know.
Yeah.
Tenebrae feels very much like that type of film.
Hmm.
some
Uh,
some of the negatives I felt with this film came down to the way the story unraveled. How did you feel about the script of this movie?
um, I actually thought it was smarter than a lot of his other movies. I think it's smarter than Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and I think it's more memorable than Bird with the Crystal Plumage. I actually have a lot more to say about it, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so like I some of the story just felt, I liked how it kept me guessing. And it was even self-aware of that. There was even, it seemed like meta commentary through the perspective of the main character.
Yeah.
And there's questions posed in the script that, as you're looking back on it, knowing the full way that it unraveled is kind of neat. That I really do appreciate it. So from a you're looking at a script the whole way, Argento shows some really creative traits in the script. I just think, you know, the actual nooks and crannies of some of like the murders and how did this happen, and maybe the final reveal, I was just a little bit low on in comparison to everything else that the script did, if that made sense. So it wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily the entirety of the script was bad. I was just, I think the way it all wrapped up, I wasn't fully impressed with.
Yeah, yeah. That definitely makes sense. Um, the the girl getting chased by a dog into the home of the murderer is a little bit of a stretch.
Yes.
Um, yeah, that dog scene. What did you think? Just her
It
getting chased by a dog.
I, the thing that I will say is, um, I wouldn't sign up for that as an as an actor, because she seemed like she was getting roughed up for real.
Yeah.
And then obviously far fetched. Um, was there anything additionally that you felt?
Um, I don't know if I should say that on camera.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, I'm kidding. I I definitely think it was a little bit of a stretch for that scene. Um, I wish that dog had more of a purpose to the story rather than just chasing one of the characters into their own demise. Um, I felt that was a little weird. Um, but unless the dog was part of something and I missed it, which I don't think I did, but
I don't think you
did you
did
find
either.
anything? Okay.
I do not think you missed anything. Um, the only I did, and I don't remember any of this, and I think I would have caught it. That wasn't his dog, right?
No, it was just some random dog. Um, this I'm I'm gonna I'm gonna stop myself. Uh, chases her down. This very aggressive dog chases her down and starts attacking her. And it's just some random dog. And yeah,
It you
and
know if if it was like his dog and it was like a trained dog, that would make somewhat sense.
yeah,
And
it would be
more
it would be a
plausible.
lot yeah, more plausible. The dog would have a bigger purpose. You could see it probably maybe die at the end, and I'll be happy. No, I'm kidding. Uh, but no, I really liked the commentary stuff, the meta narrative that this story brings. It's kind of he took um the Argento took the main character being a writer um and took and did uh that in the same way he did what he did with Suspiria with the main character being a dancer, I feel.
Yeah, and it gives the film a very distinct feel by having it centered around a very specific job type like that.
Yeah.
I I,
Um
I really like that as well.
yeah, I could see it I could see it inspiring John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, in fact. Like the story about a writer who disappeared and you realize that it people are going crazy because of it and um yeah, it's just it turns into this really meta story, which is what Tenebrae is, and I thought that was really enjoyable at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'm glad we got to talk about this because the meta elements I don't think I gave enough weight whenever I reviewed it on Letterbox, but speaking about it definitely highlighted it thanks to talking with you, which was a really good element. Um, the suspension of disbelief is one of the main problems with this. It's not a big problem for me personally, but I'm sure you know people like this, Ethan. But some viewers, it doesn't take much. It's just in a specific field of the movie, a specific thing can just completely take them out of that suspension of disbelief, and then they are just not enjoying the movie at all. Some will even turn it off. Um,
Yeah.
this film does run that risk, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'd like to discuss specific scenes with you, um,
Absolutely.
specifically like what you found to be suspension of disbelief.
Okay. Do you want me to try to
Yeah,
go
yeah.
through? The dog one is a really good one.
Hmm.
Certain this isn't necessarily a scene. I just who the actual killer is was a big one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to rack my brain for more. Was there any that occurred to you?
Um, Not necessarily, other than those two. Um, well, yeah. I don't really see the killer being a moment of disbelief, but I don't recall. So
One thing I will say is the dad of Nancy in Nightmare on Elm Street is in this film.
yes, I
It
was
was
gonna say John Saxon. He's I wrote down it was a strange role for John Saxon to play.
yes, I was very much excited to see him. Um, let's spin to some of the scenes that we really much enjoyed. Um, I think one of the iconic ones that struck me was when the two women were being murdered, and one was I don't know if it was a bed sheet or if it was a t-shirt she was putting on. Really iconic. There's a slit that goes through the shirt, and I think you can see either her whole face or just her eye staring at the camera, and it's
Great shot.
absolutely brilliant.
Um, yeah, I really like some of the kills in this movie. Apart from the one girl's because of that, like we said, the suspension of disbelief. The blood effects on the girl Jane, who was John Saxon's love interest. Um, she had a great bloody death. Like it was really well done, in my opinion.
Just remind me how did she die?
She got an axe to the arm, and her arm
Oh,
starts spewing blood.
yes, and that one took place very near the end, correct?
Yes.
That one was spectacularly done. Um, that whole sequence, honestly, that almost made up for like any guff that I had with the reveal and who it was, because the
Mhm.
ending was, just violent and chaotic and crazy. Um, and I really liked it. The suspension of disbelief. This is where it kind of came in with that reveal, and I'm kind of remembering it now, but it's in spoilers. How the writer almost devolves entirely into a madman once he's been caught. That
Mm,
broke it for me, just because it's like, because he was maintaining this air as though, I mean, he was very unsuspecting for the entirety of the film, and then at the very end it's like he cannot keep his facade any longer, and it just goes completely mad at the end. And
yeah.
it's not completely unbelievable, but I feel very nitpicky about that. But it is something where it's like, how did he completely melt down in the matter of seconds?
Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand that. I'm gonna get into anime territory for 1 second, but and a little bit of spoilers if anyone ever plans to watch this, but the ending of Death Note does the same thing, kind of,
Mm.
and that's an ending where I don't think it's very good.
I I have watched Death Note. I'm not sure if I finished it, but
Hmm.
because I think it like, there's a very good story arc that kind of ends, and then it progresses into like almost a side story. Um,
Yeah.
is that where the one you're speaking on specifically? Is that where Kira finally reveals himself to E?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is like, and bringing that up, I think is very, very apropos because Argento is very much like, the writer of Death Note, in that he is able to come up with these twists and turns to get the story to go how he wants it. He is a
Yeah.
master of, and this is going to sound very negative, but it's the only way that I can kind of word what I'm semi going for, but there might be a wrong impression, and kind of also see if you can massage this statement as well, Ethan, if you understand what I'm trying to say. But
Yeah.
he can properly put a square peg into a round hole. Does that make any sense to you?
Uh, yeah. Knows how to. He knows how to fit it in. Uh, in a different way. He knows how to think about how to. He thinks about it. They think about it. I should say they think about how they plan to. There's only one circle and one square. One square peg and one round hole, and they're trying to think outside the box and how to fit that in.
Yes, exactly. Because his stories, even just taking his complete aesthetic away from the table, his stories are very much different as well. And
Yeah,
but they're effective because of how different they are, I feel.
absolutely.
I did like the initial killer kind of plot line as well.
Yeah,
I thought that was very well done. Um,
yeah,
and all the tie-ins where it seems like it is obvious, and there's red herrings in movies, but this was like a double fake out because it is a little bit of a red herring, but at the same time it's not. I like that.
hmm
Ethan, any other notable things that you would like to highlight about Tenebrae?
Um, not really. Yeah, I think it's kind of flat for a. It doesn't have any like dramatic set pieces or anything, but I think that's a good thing. Just going back to basics, into a more meta aesthetic, rather than going for something like big and colorful like Suspiria. And I think it's just really well done. I think the '80s was the time where he was really experimenting with his style, where you have stuff like Inferno or this or Phenomena, where he's just trying to experiment with his style. Um, and I think it came up with some really interesting results with at least Tenebrae.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would highly recommend this if you like Argento, or if you're looking for like a very different horror movie to watch. Highly recommend. I gave this a 3.5. Ethan, what did you rate Tenebrae?
I gave this a 4 out of 5.
There you go. So, two recommendations to add to the list if you have not seen them already. I want to hear everyone's comments down below on what you thought. I know I'm definitely lower than you, obviously, Ethan, but I think a lot of other people on these films. Um, and I feel like when it comes to horror movies, I'm definitely the way more of a snob when it comes to horror films than almost any other genre. Um,
Absolutely.
so, my ratings semi reflect that. It's like it's not intentional. It's just I have a very high bar, and like there's been films that I can very much argue are perfect horror films, but I haven't quite rated like that just yet because and I want to get your perspective on this, Ethan, because
Hmm.
you want to be entertained, you want to be intrigued, you want to be wrapped up in it, but you also have the added expectation of you kind of want to be scared as well. And it's very, very difficult, I think, to accomplish all three of those things.
I think not so much entertained as just invested
Yeah,
in
I
a
agree.
film. Like I wouldn't call The Exorcist entertaining. I wouldn't call Hereditary entertaining. I'd call them both very investing films while also being incredibly terrifying.
Hmm.
Um, so it definitely can be entertaining. That if can't be investing, then entertaining is definitely an important factor. It just needs to be watchable, and you want to watch it.
Yes, exactly. We had this discussion when we were talking about the most important horror films of all time. A film that scared the wits out of me as a young kid watching film was Paranormal Activity, but just because that film probably scared me more than any other film has scared me, doesn't it didn't make it an automatic 5 out of 5 because the film still has its flaws. Um,
Yeah,
I'm not trying to sound edgy or what have you. I can see the horror in The Exorcist. I understand
yeah,
how horrifying that is. And if that situation were to be put upon you, that would be one of the most horrifying things. But it didn't rock me to my core the way that my dad was rocked when he was a 14-year-old and went to see that at the theater close to him with that he had to go with his older siblings to go see. Um,
hmm
it it is very hard to accomplish all of those, especially like as you become more and more seasoned in the genre. I think
yeah,
it's a very tough ask, and I honestly I rate comedies almost very similarly too. It's almost a fool's errand to be like a perfect movie for me, and I'm sure all the directors are trying to get a perfect score from me with their movies. Uh, I'm being sarcastic, but with comedies, it's like, you know, having an intriguing plot is a lot of work when you have all these punchlines that you have to get in there as well. Um,
so,
it feels like a lot to juggle, and that does affect it. So it's like they're almost in a kind of bubble. Like all the horror films that I rate should kind of be looked at in relation to other films in the same genre, because like a straight drama is going to be better suited to kind of accomplish what it's setting out to accomplish and get rated higher because of that. So very,
yeah,
very long and convoluted, but I hope that made some sense.
yeah. It made sense.
Um, I just want to kind of wrap up talking about Argento's full filmography, and I think you've seen more than I have. I've seen Deep Red, I've seen Phenomena, Tenebre, Crystal, Plumage, obviously, and Opera. Um, do you remember all the Argento films that you have seen, Ethan?
Okay, so I think I've seen seven now. Uh, it's Deep Red, Suspiria, Opera, Tenebrae, um, Inferno, Phenomena, and Bird with Crystal Plumage. So seven. Yeah.
And so, I think the only film that you have seen that I have not is Inferno. If I kept track of your list well, um,
Yes.
where does that fit within the pantheon of Argento? Is it near the top of your Argento list or nay?
No, it's uh down. It's probably second to last. Phenomena is probably my dead last, and then Inferno. and Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and then I'd probably put Tenebrae above, and then Opera, and then I put Tenebrae above Opera, and then Suspiria and Deep Red.
I one of the things I really liked about Opera was the gimmick. I think I saw the
Yeah,
trailer, and the gimmick that the serial killer has is really damn cool. And
it's brutal.
yes, yes. Um,
Yeah.
Another feature that makes Tenebrae really great too is how brutal that is. Um,
Hmm.
but Opera felt like one that I think is more surprising that that didn't burst upon mainstream more than it did. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Um, Again, like during the 80s, this is when Argento was experimenting with his style, and just the way he duct tapes this woman's mouth, uh, puts these like spikes on her eyelids to where she can't blink and she's forced to watch, um, as the people that she cares about are brutally murdered. That's a horrifying concept,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates a lot of suspense and tension. And yeah, it's just it's a very uh, it's more simple than like Tenebrae or Inferno, or it's less like self-aware and more like different in terms of how um, it was around the time of Phenomena where Argento was experimenting with how the killer did things rather than just experimenting with his style. So, um, yeah.
And what you bring up is something that I think should be kind of applauded. Is that Argento did not just latch on to one technique, one method that he was able to find success with. Because even Suspiria, his movie that is perhaps, or maybe even and arguably his most popular, you would think that would be a
Mhm.
style that he would continue to try to emulate and emulate and emulate to try to chase the success of that film. But I don't find that to be the case whatsoever. And he felt very dedicated to exploring the tales that he could tell as a director. And I think that should be applauded.
Yeah. They do feel similar in overarching plot, but they feel very different from one another in terms of how he experiments with that story and that style.
If you were to try to explain what makes Argento so great to someone who hasn't seen any of his films yet, what would be your pitch? What would How would you try to go about that?
That's interesting. I would say go into it knowing that these films are not going to be perfect and they are going to be very, very strange. Um, but I feel that if you just pay attention to what's happening and pay attention to the time that this came out and the emotions that you feel while watching them, I think you'll really enjoy the experience. Um, yeah.
I think that's a great pitch. Um, Ethan, you obviously you have been working on your craft within film. You've shot
Hmm.
short films. If Was there anything you were able to glean from Argento, or if there is someone who is younger than you, who is interested in um, becoming involved in film themselves, what would you recommend them try to glean from someone like an Argento?
Definitely how to create suspense.
Hmm.
Absolutely. How to use color, how to edit, how to incorporate uh, different forms of cinematography into your film. I think that's what the main stuff that you can glean.
And one of the things we were talking about this before this recording, you were speaking on the editing that takes place in an Argento movie. If you have a scene in mind, could you almost kind of walk through what editing or cut, transition, etc., took place and what you liked about it?
Um, Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Is there any specific instance of Argento's editing that you remember distinctly that you could kind of give the breakdown of what happened and why the editing was good?
Um, I feel like just the timing. I feel like more than anything, timing of when he like he'll he'll uh have someone alone in a room and he'll just give you like a like this wide shot and then he'll perfectly time it into like a POV shot or a close-up shot of a woman's face or something like that. It's varied, but I feel like that's the general gist is just the timing of in which he places those cuts between shots into his films.
I like that. So, it's is it the striking nature of the change that like immediately kind of you feel within that editing?
Yeah, absolutely. There's of course other ways to do suspense. Hitchcock, I think, demonstrates that demonstrates that perfectly. Not just using editing, but using sound, using the character's actions, the character's movements, using uh, the uh, the placement of the characters, using the dialogue used, using the acting, the way the actors act out the dialogue. Is just it's seamless. But Hitchcock was obviously at a different point in time in film history. He was around the 50s. Dario Argento rose to fame in the 70s and 80s.
And something that I think is a tremendous compliment that can be said about both Argento and Hitchcock is that anyone who falls remotely close to their style of suspense when talking about Hitchcock, and then if you get close to Argento's specific aesthetic, it if anything gets close to it, it feels like Argento. It feels like Hitchcock. It's like it draws back. It's influential. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Um,
Yeah,
to anyone who falls within their categories, because of how distinctly good they were at their specific strengths. I feel, and to have that be said of Argento with cinematography in the same breath of Hitchcock's suspense, while also being very good at suspense himself, I think speaks volumes as to just how understated, underrated, and brilliant Argento is as a director.
absolutely.
Um, any last words on Argento, the director, Ethan?
He's fantastic. Watch his stuff.
Agreed. Ethan, thank you very much for joining me, man. This was fun. I was, first of all, glad we got to watch Argento together and very happy to get to speak with you today. Thank you, everyone. Definitely go subscribe to his channel. It's going to be down in the comment below. And thank you again, Ethan.
Of course, it's always my pleasure.
That's all from us, folks. Thank you again. We will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.